Picture a children's book. You know the exact kind I'm talking about, right?
Oh, definitely. The ones with the thick, glossy cardboard pages.
Exactly, the ones you can't tear. You open it up, and there's this massive, cartoonish wooden boat just sort of bobbing on some gentle, perfect blue waves.
Yeah, and you've got the animals lining up 2 by 2.
Right, marching up a little wooden ramp.
Huh.
You have giraffes sticking their long, spotted necks out of a tiny window at the top. It's bright, it's colorful, and it presents this really magical, whimsical narrative of survival.
It's very cozy.
It is. It's the story of Noah. And for most of us, honestly, that is exactly where our engagement with this story begins and ends, just as a bedtime fairy tale.
Which is a huge problem.
Yeah. Because what if I told you that when you strip away the centuries of folklore, when you actually look at the oldest, most foundational texts without that children's book lens, you find something completely different.
You find something terrifyingly relevant.
Exactly. You find this incredibly accurate blueprint of systemic social collapse. So, welcome to the Deep Dive. We're really glad you're here with us. Today, we are looking at the story of Noah, as detailed in the Quran, specifically Surah Hud, Ayats 38 to 46.
Right.
And we are going to examine it through the profound sociopolitical lectures of the thinker G.A. Parwez. Our mission today, basically, is to uncover the absolute reality of this text.
And spoiler alert, it is not a story about a floating zoo.
No, not even a little bit. It is a high-stakes, uncompromising account of what happens when a society rots from the inside out.
Yeah, that framing is so essential for what we're about to unpack here, because for generations, people have approached these texts with this strict, unyielding literalism.
Like turning metaphors into historical facts.
Exactly. They treat them as magical events that happen completely divorced from the natural laws of physics or, economics or sociology. And when you do that, when you just say, God did it by magic, you actually strip the text of its intellect.
You make it safe. You make it something you don't have to critically think about.
Precisely. And Parwez's analysis is so incredibly compelling because it refuses to do that. It forces us to look at the exact Arabic linguistics used in the text.
Right.
It asks us to apply rigorous reason. It demands that we look at the uncompromising nature of what the text calls the law of requital.
The law of requital. We are going to be talking a lot about this today, so keep that term in mind.
Yeah, it's basically about cause and effect. It is the unyielding physics of human society.
Okay, let's jump right into that, because I want to start with maybe the most counterintuitive, almost bizarre detail from the traditional folklore surrounding this event.
The oven.
Yes, the oven. If you ask someone familiar with the classical traditional commentaries on how this massive earth-shattering flood actually begins, you will often hear a story about a literal oven.
Right, a baking stove.
A baking stove. A tanner. The story goes that there was an old woman, she had a baking stove in her kitchen, and suddenly, miraculously, water just starts bubbling up.
Just out of nowhere.
Spitting out of this stove, and that single kitchen appliance somehow kicks off a global flood.
Which is wild.
It's wild. Now,
Yeah.
Putting aside the magic of it all, from a purely rational perspective, you really have to pause and scratch your head. A kitchen stove setting off a global cataclysm.
Yeah, it sounds absurd, because it is.
But when Parwez applies a linguistic breakdown to this specific word, Tannur, the entire paradigm shifts completely, doesn't it?
It shifts so dramatically that you realize the traditional folklore has entirely missed the point. And, this is why linguistic precision is vital when reading ancient texts.
So what does Tannur actually mean?
Well, in classical Arabic, the word Tannur has very grounded, completely non-magical meanings. On a purely geographical level, it refers to low-lying valleys, basins, or depressions in the earth.
Okay, so places where water naturally pools.
Exactly. It's where water gathers. So on a literal environmental level, if you have unprecedented catastrophic rainfall, where does the water collect first?
In the valleys.
Right. It bursts forth from the Tannur, the low-lying areas, flooding upward and outward. But Parwez draws out an even deeper metaphorical meaning that is absolutely central to understanding this as a socio-political text.
Rather than just an ancient weather report.
Yes. Metaphorically, the Tannur represents the social engine of a society.
The social engine. Okay, break that down for me. What are we actually picturing when we say the social engine boils over?
Think of a massive furnace or a high-pressure boiler in the basement of a huge building.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
That boiler represents the collective energy, the labor, and the tension of a civilization. Now imagine a society that is built on intense class exploitation.
Like the sources describe the society Noah was living in.
Exactly. A society built on systemic corruption, where wealth is hoarded at the very top and the people at the bottom are just relentlessly squeezed.
So the pressure in that boiler starts building.
The temperature of the society rises, you have disenfranchisement, you have poverty, you have mass anger. And if there is no release valve,
If there's no justice or structural reform,
right, that pressure cannot be contained indefinitely. Eventually, the metal groans and gives out. The Tannur erupts. The social engine explodes.
I want to make sure I'm fully grasping the mechanics of this for anyone listening who is used to the Sunday school version. You are saying that the boiling over of the oven wasn't some localized, magical anomaly where a woman was baking bread and suddenly got washed away.
No, not at all.
It was a societal breaking point. It's like when a financial market completely crashes after decades of unregulated greed.
Yes.
Or when a massive public uprising happens after years and years of oppression. The system itself had reached its structural limit. The exploitation had gotten so intense that the actual fabric of the society could no longer contain the consequences of its own corruption.
That is the exact mechanism Parwez is pointing out. The text says, when our command came and the Tannur gushed forth.
And our command is the key phrase there.
Right. In the Parwezian view, the command isn't a voice booming from the clouds. It is the inevitable mathematical result of a society abandoning universal ethical laws. The pressure of their exploitation became physically unsustainable.
So the flood is almost a metaphor for consequence.
It's dual-layered. I mean, it might have involved a literal, catastrophic environmental event, perhaps a massive storm that a corrupt, decaying infrastructure was totally unprepared to handle.
Like a levee breaking because the funds to fix it were embezzled.
Exactly. But more importantly, it is a metaphorical description of a complete social and economic collapse. This is what we mean by the law of requital. Every action has a consequence.
Cause and effect.
If you build a society's foundation on injustice and exploitation, the unavoidable consequence is collapse. It is as exact and as indifferent as the laws of thermodynamics.
That sets such an incredibly dark, high-stakes tone for this narrative. I mean, it takes Noah out of this passive wait-for-a-miracle role and places him right in the middle of an active, intense pressure cooker.
He's a revolutionary in a dying system.
Right. He is watching a society on the absolute brink of annihilation. So if we rewind a bit, before the Tannur boils over, before the pressure cooker explodes, we need to understand the environment Noah was operating in.
The conditions of the boiler.
Yeah.
Right.
Because he wasn't just sitting in a field whittling a piece of wood for a fun weekend project. He was reacting to something highly specific. And the sources detail a society that was deeply, fatally fractured. Tell me about the class divide here.
The source material paints a very vivid and honestly a chillingly familiar picture of the societal context. This was a world completely dominated by a tiny elite class.
The ancient 1%.
Basically, yes. These were the wealthy, the power brokers, the unregulated capitalists of their era. But their fatal flaw, the root of the rot in their boiler, was the metric they used to measure human worth.
Which was what?
In their eyes, human value was purely material. It was determined entirely by the size of your estate, your lineage, and your profession. The text specifically highlights how these elites looked down upon manual laborers.
Though they openly mocked them, right?
Brutally. They mocked the carpenters, the blacksmiths, the washermen. To the elites, the people who actually built and maintained the physical world, were low-status, fundamentally lesser beings.
Right. The elites had this illusion of absolute safety and superiority. Because when you have all the resources, when you live in the ancient equivalent of a penthouse suite, looking down at the smog and the struggles of the people on the ground floor, you feel completely insulated.
You think the rules simply don't apply to you.
Exactly, you think you're untouchable. And into this hyper-capitalist, brutally divided society steps Noah.
And his movement isn't just a gentle religious gathering.
No, it's a massive fundamental disruption.
He is demanding human equality. But he is doing it by introducing a completely different metric for human worth. He's saying worth isn't based on your bank account or your job title. It's based on taqwa.
Taqwa, yes. And that new metric was an existential threat.
Because Noah's movement was terrifying to the elites, he was attempting to dismantle the only system that gave them power. Now, we really need to define taqwa here because the traditional translation really does it a disservice.
Yeah, how is it usually translated?
Traditionally, it's often translated simply as piety or fear of God. And to a modern listener, piety sounds very passive.
Oh, absolutely. When I hear piety, I don't think of a socio-political revolutionary. I think of someone who is deeply personal about their faith, but maybe not disrupting the economic status quo.
Just sitting quietly in a place of worship, being generally harmless.
Exactly.
But in the Quranic sense, especially within the Parwezian framework of building a robust, resilient society, taqwa means something far more active and demanding.
Like what?
It means impeccable character, rigorous conduct, and the meticulous fulfillment of your societal responsibilities.
So it's about action.
Completely. It means extreme ethical vigilance in your day-to-day dealings. Noah was introducing a paradigm where a manual laborer, a washerman who executes his duties with absolute honesty, integrity, and care for his community.
Possesses more taqwa?
Yes, and is therefore fundamentally superior in a systemic sense to a billionaire who lies, exploits his workers, and corrupts the system for personal gain.
You can imagine how well that went over with the ancient billionaires.
Oh, they loved it.
Right. Right. It's like walking into the boardroom of a massive monopolistic corporation today, a company that is, polluting rivers and underpaying workers.
Yeah.
And telling the executives to their faces that the janitor who cleans their lobby has more objective value to the universe than they do.
Of course they're going to push back. They're going to hate him.
They despised him because if Noah was right, their entire worldview was a lie.
And their entire wealth was ill-gotten.
Yeah. And their reaction, as the text outlines, takes the form of relentless mockery. But before we explore their mockery, we have to look at what Noah was actually doing to provoke it. He is given a command to build the ark.
Right, verse 37.
Yes, verse 37 contains this highly specific, fascinating phrase. The command is, build the ark under our eyes.
Under our eyes.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there because my immediate instinct, based on the childhood stories, is to picture a giant eye in the sky.
Literally looking down from the clouds.
Yeah. It sounds like God is physically watching, maybe providing some kind of magical force field. Like Noah is just tossing wooden planks into the air, and a divine gaze is making them perfectly interlock.
Just auto-assembling the boat.
Right. It implies a supernatural ease to the construction.
Which is precisely the literalist trap that Parwez warns against. If you interpret under our eyes as magical, effortless construction where the hammer essentially swings itself, you lose the entire lesson.
So what does it actually mean in this sociopolitical framework?
In this framework, under our eyes means something entirely grounded in reality. It means under strict, divine, ideological supervision.
Ideological supervision.
Yes. It means building according to the exact permanent laws of nature and the permanent laws of ethics.
So the ark isn't just a really big wooden boat.
The physical boat is secondary to what it represents. The ark, in this context, is the meticulous construction of a sustainable parallel society.
Wow.
It is a highly organized movement. Noah is gathering people who possess that taqwa we just discussed, and he is building a system based on correct ethical principles.
A parallel society.
Yes, and this new parallel society is designed to survive the inevitable collapse of the corrupt, wider society around it. So building it under our eyes means following the blueprint of universal law perfectly.
You can't cut corners.
You absolutely cannot cut corners. You cannot allow corruption to seep into this new movement because you cannot cheat the law of requital.
Right.
If you build this new society with flawed ethics, it will sink just like the old one.
That is profound. I mean, it's the difference between sitting around hoping for a miracle to save you and actively engineering a real-world solution based on objective, uncompromising reality.
It takes incredible, painstaking work.
But while he is engineering this solution, while he and his followers are painstakingly building this parallel structure, the elites are watching them.
And laughing.
Yeah, verse 38 highlights their reaction. It says that whenever the chiefs of his people passed by him, they scoffed at him. They mocked him. And honestly, looking at human nature, this is arguably the most relatable part of the text so far.
How so? I mean, why relatable?
Well, just think about our modern world. Think about the ultra-wealthy, the people who control massive industries today. When you have scientists waving red flags about an environmental crisis or, economists warning about a massive housing bubble or systemic market collapse, what is the initial reaction of the ultra-elite?
They dismiss it.
They laugh. They sit in their private jets, insulated from the ground-level reality, and they mock the whistleblowers. They assume their vast wealth, their mountain of resources, provides them with a permanent, impenetrable shield against any disaster.
They think they can buy their way out of anything.
Right. They look at people who are preparing for the fallout, people who are advocating for an ethical restructuring of the economy, and they just laugh. They think trying to change the system is the ultimate foolishness.
That specific brand of arrogance is a historical constant. The psychology of the elite class just hasn't changed. They always assume their material power grants them immunity from consequence.
Because they've never faced consequences before.
Exactly. They view honesty, ethical preparation, and the painstaking, slow work of building a sustainable system as hopelessly naive. They mocked Noah because, in their worldview, if a disaster actually did happen, they could just buy their way out of it.
Build a bigger bunker.
Right. They would hire the best security, they would flee to higher ground, they had the resources to weather any storm, but they fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the crisis.
The boiler was exploding.
Yes. They didn't understand that the flood coming wasn't just a physical inconvenience like a bad rainstorm. It was a total systemic collapse that their paper wealth could not outrun. They were laughing at the very mechanism of survival.
And Noah's response to their laughter.
According to the text, his response is essentially, if you mock us now, we will mock you later.
Ouch. That sounds a bit petty, honestly. Like a playground retort.
It does sound like that at first glance. But we have to be careful not to read that as vindictive. Noah isn't just being petty, he is making a statement of objective fact regarding the law of requital.
Okay, unpack that.
He is saying, your ignorance of universal law is genuinely laughable, and when the physical consequences of your corruption finally arrive, the sheer absurdity of your arrogance will be laid bare for everyone to see. It's an observation, not a threat.
I really want to pull on this thread, this concept of the law of requital, because it is the absolute engine driving this entire deep dive.
It is the core of Parwez's analysis.
Yeah. Why does this ancient society inevitably collapse?
Yeah.
The folklore tells us it's because God just woke up incredibly angry one Tuesday, decided humanity was a mistake, and arbitrarily drowned everyone.
Just wipe the board clean.
Right, like an angry kid knocking over blocks. But the sources we are looking at describe this entirely differently. They describe it as social physics.
Yes, the uncompromising, unemotional nature of cause and effect.
And Parwez's lectures provide this incredibly vivid modern analogy to explain how taqwa and the law of requital actually interact in the real world. I'm talking about the analogy of the corrupt engineer.
Yes, the bad road analogy. It is brilliant because it perfectly encapsulates why a lack of taqwa leads directly mathematically to destruction.
Let's walk through it for the listener, because it makes everything click.
Let's do it. Imagine a massive, modern public infrastructure project. The government allocates millions and millions of dollars to build a major highway. It's supposed to connect cities, facilitate trade. It's a huge deal.
A vital piece of the social engine.
Exactly. But the people in charge of building it, the chief engineers, the contractors, the site supervisors, they completely lack taqwa. They lack character, integrity, and ethical vigilance.
So what happens in practice? Corruption isn't usually a cartoon villain twirling a mustache. It's a series of boring, bureaucratic decisions.
It's death by 1,000 cuts. It starts in the procurement process. They decide to take kickbacks from certain suppliers. They siphon off public funds into offshore accounts.
Standard political corruption.
Right. But they still have to build a road, or at least something that looks like a road, to cover their tracks. So to maximize their illicit profits, they compromise the structural integrity of the project.
They cut the corners.
They use substandard materials. They buy bad cement that hasn't been properly cured. They use cheaper, thinner steel rebar. They lay a thin, superficial layer of asphalt over loose gravel instead of a proper foundation.
Right. They build a facade. And for a little while, it actually works. The road is finished, looks black and shiny.
They have a massive opening ceremony.
Yeah, the corrupt engineers cut the red ribbon, the politicians take their photos, the media applauds the new infrastructure, and everyone pats themselves on the back. But structurally, internally, at a microscopic level, that road is completely rotten.
It is a disaster waiting to happen.
Precisely. And then reality arrives.
The stress test.
Yes. The very first heavy rain comes. Not a biblical, miraculous, world-ending flood. Just a severe, seasonal, heavy downpour. A natural stress test. And what happens to the road?
Because it was built with bad cement and no foundation, 97% of it washes away immediately.
Just crumbles.
The asphalt cracks, the gravel washes out, massive sinkholes open up. The road crumbles into nothing. Now, in the aftermath, the corrupt engineers are going to hold a press conference. What are they going to say?
Oh, they'll blame everything else.
Right.
They will try to blame the environment. They'll say it was an unprecedented storm. It was a once-in-a-century anomaly. It was an act of God.
Exactly. But the investigation, the actual physical audit of the rubble, reveals the truth. The road didn't collapse because the rain was uniquely malicious or angry.
Rain is just rain. It does what water does.
The road collapsed because the cement was bad. The builders lacked taqwa. The destruction of that highway was baked into the very foundation of the project from the exact moment they decided to compromise their ethics for greed.
The collapse was inevitable.
That is the law of requital. The consequence of using bad cement is the structural failure of the road.
This is the perfect way to frame it. The law of requital takes all the mysticism and arbitrary anger out of the concept of divine punishment.
It really does.
Taqwa isn't just a glowing spiritual aura that makes you a nice person. It is the structural integrity of your actions. If you use bad cement, the road washes away. Now scale that up to an entire civilization.
A terrifying thought.
Yeah, if a society uses bad cement, if its foundation is built on injustice, the exploitation of the poor, extreme wealth inequality, and systemic corruption, that society will inevitably collapse under the pressure of the elements.
The boiler explodes.
Right. The flood in Noah's time wasn't God arbitrarily throwing a lightning bolt. It was the heavy rain finally hitting a society built with bad cement.
And this connects directly back to why the elite's mockery of Noah was so incredibly misguided. They thought they were perfectly safe because they were wealthy, but they were standing on a rotten bridge of their own making.
They were holding the bad cement.
Yes. When a society abandons permanent values, when it prioritizes short-term material gain over long-term ethical sustainability, it isn't just being immoral in a philosophical sense. It is actively constructing the mechanics of its own demise.
The social physics are exact.
A system simply cannot sustain itself on falsehood and exploitation indefinitely. Eventually, reality asserts itself, and the law of requital is completely, terrifyingly blind to your social status.
It doesn't care if you have a private jet.
It doesn't care if you are a king or a carpenter. It only measures the structural integrity of your actions.
Okay, so the system is rapidly collapsing. The heavy rain is starting. The Tannur, the social engine, is boiling over and erupting.
The consequences have arrived.
Now we come to the critical moment of embarking, of actually loading the Ark. And this is where we have to do a really deep linguistic dive, because this is the specific point where the traditional stories get, quite frankly, wildly entertaining, logically absurd.
Oh, the logistics of the literal zoo.
Yes. We need to talk about the pairs. The command to bring the Zajain. What exactly is being loaded onto this Ark to ensure that the future of humanity survives?
If we look at the traditional tafsir, the classical medieval commentaries, they approach the command to bring the pairs onto the Ark with a rigid, almost suffocating literalism.
Because they view the Ark purely as a physical boat.
Right. A floating wooden boat tasked with holding every single animal species on planet Earth. The logistical gymnastics they have to perform to make the story work are genuinely astonishing.
Oh, the sources highlight a few of these classical interpretations, and they are hilarious. I mean, they are the perfect example of how hyperliteralism completely derails human intellect.
Let's hear one.
Okay, let me set the scene based on these old commentaries. Noah is at the ramp of the Ark, trying to load all the animals, and the story goes that there is a stubborn donkey. It just will not get on the boat.
Digging its hooves in.
Yeah. And why won't it get on? Because, according to this folklore, Satan himself is physically crouching behind the donkey, clinging to its hind legs, pulling it backward.
Literally holding the donkey back.
Right. So you have this cartoonish tug of war. Noah is pulling the halter from the front. Satan is pulling the tail from the back. Finally, Noah loses his temper and yells at the donkey, "Get in, even if Satan is with you." And boom, the donkey trots onto the boat, and oops, Satan gets a free ride onto the Ark. And according to this story, that is a literal explanation for how evil survived the flood.
It sounds like a comedy sketch.
It really does. But we have to understand, these were written as serious attempts by scholars to rationalize a literal interpretation of a global flood and a floating zoo.
They had painted themselves into a logical corner, and these magical stories were the only way out.
And it gets even better, because once you have all these animals crammed together on a wooden boat for months, a massive new problem arises.
Hygiene.
Hygiene and the food chain. The sources mention the famous story of the mice. According to the folklore, the mice on the Ark are rapidly multiplying. They're getting everywhere, And more importantly, they are eating all the grain that was stored to feed the humans and the other animals.
So Noah is facing a starvation crisis.
Exactly. He prays for a solution.
Yeah.
And what is the divine intervention? A lion, sitting in its cage, suddenly catches a fever.
A fever, okay.
And in its illness, the lion sneezes. And out of the lion's nostrils pop two fully formed cats.
Oh, wow, sneezing out felines.
Yes. And these magical sneeze cats immediately run off and take care of the mice problem. I mean, you have to give them credit for creativity. It's cinematic.
It is highly creative, entertaining folklore, but as Parwez's lectures so sharply point out, it is also deeply, profoundly tragic.
Tragic. Why tragic? I mean, it's just a silly story.
It's tragic because of what it does to the human mind over centuries.
What do you mean?
When you take these profound, complex philosophical texts designed to guide human civilization through collapse, and you turn them into literal, magical, floating zoos where lions sneeze out cats and the devil rides a donkey, you entirely strip the text of its actual wisdom.
You dumb it down.
You actively shut down critical thinking. You teach generation after generation that religion and ancient texts in general are realms where logic, reason, and physics simply do not apply.
That's a really good point. You train people to expect magic instead of demanding ethical structure.
Exactly. You train people to stop asking why and how. You reduce an advanced manual for societal survival into an irrational fairy tale. And in doing so, you lose the actual life-saving instruction the text is trying to impart.
Okay, I am fully with you. If it's not sneezing lions and demonic donkeys, what is the actual instruction? When the text commands Noah to load the Zawjane, what is the true meaning?
The linguistic breakdown of the word Zawjane is the key that unlocks this entire section. The root word certainly refers to pairs, yes, but it specifically means complementary pairs.
Complementary pairs.
Things that must be paired together to create a functional, complete whole. Think of a lock and a key, a right shoe and a left shoe, a positive and a negative electrical charge.
They need each other to work.
Right. In the context of building a new, sustainable society, which, remember, is what the Ark actually represents, you do not just need a male and female of every animal species. That completely misses the metaphorical point of the movement.
So what are the pairs of a society?
To build a society that won't just immediately rot and collapse again, you need to bring together the complementary pairs of human existence.
Wait, I'm struggling with that a bit. Complementary pairs sounds like a great modern political slogan. You know, we need balance.
Sure, it sounds like rhetoric.
But how does that actually save a society from a physical or economic collapse?
Right.
If the flood is a literal societal breakdown, how does balancing abstract concepts act as a lifeboat? What does loading the Zawjane look like in practice?
It looks like balancing the fundamental opposing forces of human society so that they support each other rather than destroy each other. You cannot have a sustainable society based purely on material economics. You must pair economics with ethics.
Economics and ethics.
Those are a Zawjane. If you have a booming economy but no ethics, you get extreme exploitation, you get monopolies, you get a society that grinds the poor into dust.
That's the bad cement again.
Yes. You also cannot have unbridled, rapid material progress without pairing it with permanent, universal human values. You must balance the rights of the individual with the strict responsibilities to the community.
Rights and responsibility.
Exactly. You must pair reason with empathy. These are the Zawjane, the complementary pairs required for any society to function harmoniously and survive a crisis.
Oh, I see. So you are looking at the previous society, the one that is currently drowning outside the Ark. They collapsed precisely because their pairs were divorced.
Completely severed.
They had immense material wealth and economics, but they completely discarded ethics. They had incredible rights and privileges for the elites, but they recognized zero responsibilities to the vulnerable laborers they mocked.
Exactly. The old society was walking on one leg. It was fundamentally unbalanced. If Noah's new movement, this Ark, didn't intentionally integrate these balanced pairs from the very beginning, the new society would just eventually replicate the exact same failures of the old one.
They would just build another boiler that would eventually explode.
They would survive the flood only to build another corrupt city. The command to bring the Zawjane onto the Ark is not a logistical command about animal husbandry. It is a foundational command to build a holistic, balanced socio-political system.
It is the DNA of a civilization that will not self-destruct.
Beautifully put.
Yes. That is incredible. It elevates the entire text
Yeah.
from a bizarre logistical nightmare about animal waste disposal on a wooden boat to an absolute masterclass in political science and sociology.
Yeah.
You aren't saving animals, you are saving the structural pillars of human civilization.
You're saving humanity from itself.
And that naturally brings us to how this new society actually operates.
Yeah.
Once you have built this ark, once you have structured a community with these complementary pairs, how does it navigate the chaotic, violent waters of a collapsing world?
How does it move forward?
Exactly. How does the ark move? And this introduces us to a phrase in verse 41 that is probably one of the most commonly recited, yet least understood, phrases in this entire tradition. The verse says, regarding the ark, in the name of Allah is its sailing and its anchoring. Majreha wa mursa.
Majreha morsa.
Now, I have to stop you here, because when I hear in the name of Allah is its sailing, I immediately think of someone just uttering a magic phrase to start an engine.
Like a spell.
Yeah, like crossing your fingers before a big presentation or throwing salt over your shoulder for good luck.
Yeah.
Is this just an ancient incantation to make sure the boat doesn't stall? How is this any different from superstition?
It is a completely valid skepticism because, frankly, in traditional cultural practice, that is exactly how the phrase Bismillah in the name of Allah is used today.
People say it before doing almost anything.
Right. It is treated as a blessing, a protective verbal word that you chant before eating a meal or turning the key in your car or starting a test, hoping it brings good fortune.
Like a good luck charm.
But Parwez linguistic analysis completely deconstructs this superstitious view, saying, in the name of Allah does not mean simply uttering the syllables of the phrase. In the Quranic context, the name of God refers directly to the attributes of God.
The attributes, what are those called?
The Asma'ul Husna.
Okay, the Asma'ul Husna. So attributes, like characteristics.
Yes, but more than just personality traits. These attributes represent the permanent laws and foundational characteristics that govern the universe. For instance, one of the primary attributes of God mentioned repeatedly is Rububiyyah.
Rububiyyah. What does that mean practically?
Rububiyyah means the providing of nourishment, sustenance, and absolute protection to all creations in equal measure so that they can reach their full natural potential.
Okay, so if Rububiyyah means universal nourishment and protection, what does it mean to do something in the name of that attribute?
It means to align your physical actions, or, in the case of the Ark, your entire social and political system with that specific attribute.
Oh, I'm starting to see it.
If the divine attribute is unconditional nourishment and protection for all, then Bismillah means your parallel society must be physically structured to provide nourishment, housing, equity, and protection to all its citizens without any discrimination based on class or wealth.
You are not just saying a word. You are manifesting that divine attribute in the physical, political world through your social organization.
Exactly. You are operationalizing it.
I am really grasping this now. So when the text says, in the name of Allah is its sailing and its anchoring, it is not talking about a magic word powering a literal wooden boat through a storm.
Yeah.
It is describing the fundamental operational parameters of a social movement.
Yes. Let's look at the words Majreha wa mursaha. It's sailing. This represents the start of the social movement, the initiating action, the launching of the new society.
The starting point.
And it's anchoring. This represents the goal, the destination, the final objective. What the text is saying is that both the means, the sailing, and the ends, the anchoring, are governed entirely by the permanent natural laws of Allah.
So the journey and the destination.
Right. The society does not navigate the chaos of the world because they chanted a magical protective shield. They survive because every single action they take, from start to finish, is perfectly aligned with correct, ethical, universal principles.
So it's essentially saying this entire project operates strictly according to the laws of physics and ethics. It's an exact science.
An exact science.
If an engineer builds a suspension bridge according to the strict, uncompromising laws of physics, gravity, and material science, that bridge is going to stand.
Yes.
It withstands the wind and the traffic, not because the engineer stood on the tower and chanted a spell, but because the engineer aligned their physical work with objective reality.
The bridge is in harmony with the laws of nature.
And the Ark survives the flood of societal collapse because it is a system perfectly aligned with the laws of ethical and social sustainability.
That is exactly it. They survived because their socioeconomic system utilized the correct cement.
No bad cement on the Ark.
Exactly. They embodied the complementary pairs, and they operated their society based on universal nourishment. It was a triumph of applied ethics, not a triumph of magic.
But let's unpack the reality of that. Because this idea that a social movement or an individual survival has to operate like exact, unyielding physics is a profound concept, but it is also terrifyingly strict.
It is entirely unforgiving.
It implies a harshness to the universe. It means there is absolute zero room for nepotism. There is zero room for cutting corners. And most devastatingly, there is zero room for emotional exceptions.
And that harsh reality brings us to the most heartbreaking, emotionally complex part of the entire narrative.
Because this uncompromising reliance on permanent law comes at an agonizing personal cost to Noah. We have to talk about the tragedy of New Sun.
This is perhaps the most crucial scene in the entire text for understanding the absolute terrifying impartiality of the law of requital.
Tell me about verses 42 and 43.
They paint a scene of immense dramatic and emotional tension. The collapse has fully begun. The waters are rising metaphorically and perhaps literally. The corrupt societal structure is violently disintegrating.
The Tannur has gushed forth.
Yes. Noah is on the ark. He is within this parallel system of safety that he has built perfectly according to law. And he looks out and he sees his son.
Oh, man.
His son has separated himself from Noah's movement. Noah calls out to him, and it is a desperate, guttural plea from a father facing the death of his child. He yells, "Oh, my son, come aboard with us and be not with the disbelievers."
And the son's response is chilling. It is chilling in its sheer arrogance. Even as the world is ending around him, he refuses. He yells back, "I will take refuge on a mountain to protect me from the water."
The mountain.
Let's analyze this mountain, because in the context of everything we've discussed, the elite class, the penthouse suites, the arrogance of wealth, the corrupt engineers, what does this mountain actually represent?
The mountain is the ultimate symbol of the old world's illusions.
Illusions of safety.
Yes. It represents material height. It represents entrenched power, accumulated wealth, and the false security of elite safety.
So the son is banking on the old system.
He believes that the existing power structures, the high ground of a corrupt society, will be enough to save him from the consequences of that society's own actions.
He is essentially trusting the corrupt engineer's road to hold up against the flood.
Precisely. He believes his social position, his material wealth, and perhaps even his biological lineage as a prophet's son gives him immunity from the natural laws. He chooses to rely on the physical and social mountain rather than the ethical ark.
But practically speaking, if the son had the wealth, if he had the high ground, why didn't the mountain work? What is the actual mechanism of his failure here? Why couldn't he just write it out?
Because in a total systemic collapse, paper wealth and social status become instantly worthless.
Right.
If the agricultural system fails, if the supply chains break, if the rule of law completely disintegrates because the foundation was corrupt, sitting on a pile of gold on top of a hill won't buy you a loaf of bread.
The gold is just metal at that point.
Exactly. The mountain cannot shield you from a systemic rot that has infected everything. The text says a wave comes between them, and the son is among those who drown.
The wave.
The wave of truth, the wave of ultimate consequence, sweeps over the mountain of falsehood. The system he trusted consumed him.
But here is where it gets incredibly difficult to read, and where the human heart of the story clashes violently with the cold reality of universal law.
But Noah's reaction.
Noah watches his son drown. He is utterly devastated. He turns to God, and he raises what is arguably the most anguished, relatable question a parent could ever ask. In verse 45, he says, "My Lord, indeed my son is of my family, and indeed your promise is true, and you are the most just of judges."
He's desperate for an explanation.
He's basically pleading, God, you promised to save my family. He is my kid. He has my blood. Why couldn't I save my own kid?
It is the ultimate collision between biological emotion and ideological law. Noah is appealing to the oldest, deepest human bond in existence. Blood. DNA. He is my family. But God's answer, given in verse 46, represents a monumental paradigm shift in the history of human thought.
It is an answer that shatters the ancient world.
It does. The divine response is, "Oh, Noah, indeed he is not of your family. Indeed his conduct was unrighteous."
He is not of your family. Just let that sink in for a moment. To say that to a grieving father who just watched his child die.
It's brutal.
It feels so harsh. It is so utterly uncompromising. It is the absolute definition of an impersonal universe. I mean, my initial reaction just reading it as a human being is almost anger at the text. How can a text claim to be about mercy and nourishment and then deliver a line that cold?
I completely understand that reaction. It shocks the system. But we have to look deeper at what is actually being established here. The answer is uncompromising, because the law of requital must be uncompromising in order to be perfectly just.
Right. If there's an exception, it's not a law.
Think about it. If the universe makes exceptions for the elite, or makes exceptions for the sons of prophets, or makes exceptions just because someone is related to a good person, then the system is inherently corrupt.
It would just be a universe of nepotism.
Exactly. The answer, his conduct was unrighteous, establishes the ultimate unbreakable supremacy of action over lineage. The law of requital is completely impersonal.
It doesn't check your ID.
If you choose to stand on a mountain of falsehood and corruption, the wave of consequence will sweep you away, regardless of whose DNA you carry. The text is demanding that reason dictate our understanding. Actions determine your destiny, not your bloodline.
It's exactly like gravity.
Let's hear it.
Let's go back to the physics analogy. Gravity does not care if you are a king, a billionaire, a beggar, or a prophet's son.
Not at all.
If you step off a cliff, you fall. The law of gravity applies equally to all mass, without emotion or preference. What this text is saying is that the moral, ethical, and social laws of the universe operate with that exact same terrifying indifference to bloodlines and titles.
They are blind laws.
If you live a life of exploitation and corruption, the societal gravity will pull you down into the flood. You cannot slash a VIP badge to the laws of physics to stop yourself from falling, and you cannot flash your family tree to the law of requital to save yourself from societal collapse.
That analogy is flawless. The universe does not accept bribes, and it does not read pedigrees. And this realization leads us to the final, truly transformative concept of this deep dive.
The broader implications.
Yes. What are the broader implications of this son's death? Because, as heartbreaking as it is, this isn't just a sad story about a rebellious teenager making a bad choice. This event is laying a permanent foundation for how human beings are supposed to organize themselves moving forward.
Okay, lay that out for us.
If biology, DNA, and lineage do not define family in the eyes of universal law, what does?
Right, because up until this point, and frankly dominating a lot of human history even today, the primary model of human organization is tribalism.
Biological tribalism.
My tribe, right or wrong. My blood, right or wrong. My nation, right or wrong. This text is taking a sledgehammer to the very concept of biological tribalism.
It is entirely dismantling it. To illustrate how revolutionary this concept is, the Parwezian sources make a brilliant connection here to a much later, highly documented historical event, the Battle of Badr in early Islamic history.
Oh, the Battle of Badr, okay.
The Battle of Badr is essentially the physical, historical manifestation of the exact principle established with Noah and his son.
Oh, so?
In Badr, you had a very small community of believers, a new ideological movement fighting for their literal survival against the powerful, wealthy elite of Mecca, the established corrupt system.
So they were basically the new ark facing the old society.
Exactly. But what makes Badr historically unique is how the battle lines were drawn. They were entirely unprecedented for the ancient world. They were not drawn by blood, tribe, or geography. They were drawn purely by ideology.
Slow down and explain the demographics of that battle for the listener, because when you map it out, considering the intense tribalism of ancient Arabia, the reality of who was fighting who is mind-blowing.
It really is. In ancient tribal Arabia, your bloodline was everything. It was your insurance policy, your identity, your legal protection, your entire world. To turn against your tribe was unthinkable. It was literal social suicide.
You would be an outcast.
But at the Battle of Badr, biological families were literally facing each other across the battlefield with swords drawn.
Wow.
The Prophet's own biological uncles, men who shared his exact bloodline, were the leaders of the Quraysh elite. They represented the oppressive, corrupt system. They were standing on the mountain, therefore they were on the opposing side, they were the enemy.
Even though they were blood relatives.
Yes. Meanwhile, standing shoulder to shoulder with the Prophet, defending this new system, were men who biologically, geographically, and ethnically had absolutely no connection to him whatsoever.
Give me some examples of who was standing with him.
You had men like Bilal, who was originally from Abyssinia, which is modern-day Ethiopia. You had Salman, who was from Persia.
Complete foreigners to the Meccan tribes.
In the old tribal world, a Meccan elite would never, ever consider a Persian or an Abyssinian as an equal, let alone a brother. But in this new paradigm established by the Noah narrative, Bilal and Salman were considered the truest family. They were the brothers.
While the biological uncles, sharing the same DNA, were considered absolute strangers to the movement.
Yes.
Because Bilal and Salman were on the Ark. They shared the ideology, they possessed the taqwa, they were committed to building a society based on the complementary pairs, the Zawjain, of justice and economics.
I have the right cement.
The biological uncles, despite having the exact same blood as the founder of the movement, were standing on the mountain of falsehood. They were relying on their elite status and their wealth.
Exactly. What you see at Badur, seated by the story of Noah, is the birth of true ideological nationhood.
Ideological nationhood.
Yeah.
That is a massive shift.
It is the radical concept that humanity is not fundamentally divided by race, blood, skin color, or geography. Those are merely accidental biological traits. True humanity is divided purely by ideology and actions.
Are you on the ark or are you on the mountain?
Exactly. The defining question is, are you on the side of righteous conduct, ethical balance, and universal nourishment? Or are you on the side of exploitation, corruption, and elite privilege?
And Noah's son made his choice.
Noah's biological son made his choice. He chose the side of the corrupt elite. He chose the safety of the mountain. And by making that ideological choice, his actions permanently severed the biological bond with his father.
He unfamilied himself.
He made himself a complete stranger to the movement of justice. He became part of the old, collapsing world. And the law of requital, operating flawlessly and without emotion, washed that old world away.
So as we bring this all together, look at how far we have traveled today in this deep dive. We started with a children's book. We started with painted giraffes, literal baking ovens spitting out magic water, and sneezing lions producing cats to eat mice.
The fairy tale version.
Yeah. And by applying reason, by trusting the linguistics of the text, we have uncovered something incredibly profound. We uncovered not a kitchen appliance, but the terrifying pressure cooker of social inequality and systemic corruption.
It's a boiling boiler.
We learn about the bad cement, the realization that societal collapse is the mathematical result of abandoning ethics. We learn that survival isn't about gathering a zoo, it's about bringing together the zajing, the complementary pairs of ethics and economics to build a stable, parallel society.
Weak arc.
Right. We saw that navigating crises requires madreha mursaha, aligning our entire social engine with the exact physics of universal law, providing protection and nourishment to all. And finally, we face the tragic, devastating, but profoundly fair reality of the universe. Gravity does not care who your father is.
It certainly doesn't.
The law of requital is impersonal. Actions triumph over lineage. Ideology triumphs over biology.
It is a sobering, fiercely intellectual view of the text. It demands a level of maturity from the reader that traditional folklore simply does not.
Absolutely.
And the lesson doesn't end with the floodwaters receding. Just as a teaser, if we look briefly ahead to the verses immediately following this narrative, verses 47 through 49 through 10, we see God finalizing this lesson with Noah.
What happens next?
The waters have settled, the sun is gone, and Noah is told in no uncertain terms, "Do not ask me about things you have no knowledge of."
Wow.
Think about the immense weight of that command. Noah had just experienced the ultimate human trauma, the violent loss of a child. But the divine response is not mere emotional coddling. It is a strict, unyielding reinforcement of reason.
It doesn't soften the blow.
It brilliantly establishes the absolute priority of empirical evidence and universal law over human emotional pleading. You cannot bend the rules of the universe just because your heart is broken. You must align with what is true, not what is comfortable. It is the ultimate demand for intellectual rigor in the face of tragedy.
It is the ultimate demand for intellectual rigor. And, it is the demand we desperately need today. We live in a world of diagnostic muddy waters, where we so often want the comfort of a clean X-ray, the comfort of the high mountain, the comfort of relying on our wealth or our bloodlines to save us from the consequences of our collective actions.
We want a free pass.
We want exceptions. We want the bad cement to hold just long enough for us to cross the bridge. But the law grants no exceptions. The physics of society are exact. And so, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought.
Let's hear it.
If the Ark is not a wooden boat, but actually a metaphor for a society built on balanced economic and ethical pairs, take a hard look around at our modern world today.
Look at the boiler.
Yes. As the waters of immense wealth inequality, extreme political polarization, and undeniable environmental crises continue to rise, as the pressure in our own global Tannur reaches a fever pitch, boiling over in protests and systemic failures, what complementary pairs are we missing on our own boat?
That's the real question.
If the social flood is coming, and we know the mountain of elite wealth won't save us, are we actually doing the hard work of building an ark? Or are we just using bad cement, building a rotten highway, and praying that it doesn't rain?